Today, I'm excited to share a highly collaborative project that we did focused on climate adaptation for Namāēw, or Lake Sturgeon, in the Great Lakes. Namāēw is the Menominee word for Lake Sturgeon, which I will be using today throughout the project in recognition of the history of the Indigenous people in the Midwest and some core collaborators on this work. So this project was heavily partnership driven, and we sought to combine multiple ways of knowing, represented here by this beautiful artwork that we developed with the artist Miri Viard for this project. So you'll see this piece of art kind of filtered throughout the presentation today, as it really is this nice representation of the project. And also this work was recently published in the journal Fisheries. So I'll be giving some highlights, but for more details, the paper is available and I'm happy to share a copy. All right. So I want to start off by expressing my gratitude to the collaborators and partners on this project. This project involved collaboration with 11 tribal nations and organizations in the Great Lakes region, and was driven by them. So I am speaking today, but I represent many others on our project team. Okay, so to jump in, many folks here may be familiar, but inland fisheries are really these hotspots of nature's benefits to people, where freshwaters cover only about 0.01% of the Earth's surface areas, but disproportionately offer substantial cultural, ecological, subsistence, employment, and economic benefits. But we know our waters and fisheries are changing due to many drivers, but exacerbated by intensifying climate change impacts. Here's one of my favorite visuals kind of demonstrating this change from the 2023 IPCC report that shows how people born at different times will experience a much warmer world than in the past. And specifically, when we think about Indigenous fisheries, they are expected to be disproportionately affected by climate change, given the place-based nature of these communities. For example, there are about 400 million Indigenous people globally who live only on about a quarter of the land, but they interact with the majority of biodiversity. So it's really critical to understand how climate change will impact these cultural, spiritual, and subsistence relationships. You may notice throughout the presentation these quotes that I've incorporated. These come from study participants, and they really exemplify many of the concepts that we'll talk about today. For example, here, when a participant from the Lake Superior region said, "Indigenous peoples receive deep knowledge from the environment. How will we learn when things change?" In the Midwest, Namāēw, or Lake Sturgeon, are a fish that support substantial subsistence, cultural, and spiritual relationships for many tribes. Namāēw are native to and threatened in 20 US states and 7 Canadian provinces. And to provide more context on the importance of Namāēw to Indigenous communities in the Great Lakes, I'm going to throw it to some of our project collaborators from the Menominee tribe of Wisconsin from this very lovely YouTube video that was put together. And here's a clip.
Jay Ryder. I'm the Fish and Wildlife Manager for the Menominee tribe. Each and every spring, the reason the tribe is where we're at today is at the Kashina Falls, the Wolf River, we'd always have there'd be a calling, there'd be like a drum sound. Once that drum sound was heard, the lake sturgeon came in right behind that and spawned. And then that would react, because lake sturgeon is an ancestral clan of the Menominee tribe. Someone from the lake sturgeon clan they'd start the ceremony of spring.
They're directly related to our thunder beings and our thunder being stories. The sturgeons, when we harvest them, all the people would come in from all over to this location here.
The sturgeon impacted the Menominee people over time as in the beginning as a subsistence, a way of survival, I think I would say, and I'll go back to the earliest history that I know is when when the Menominee people settled here in 1854, one of the reasons they decided to settle was of the sturgeon run. Menominees had to endure long winters, and during the springtime, that the tribal people was depleted of their energy and in diets. Of course, the winters were tough, so the sturgeon was a welcome sight, number one, for them to arrive at Kashina Falls, and that's where the Menominee people would gather to gather fish and to have a big feast and to kind of rejuvenate their population. It would re-nourish, I'd say, over the long enduring winters.
Jay Ryder.
So as mentioned by folks in the video, Namāēw are an ancient fish. One of my kind of favorite fun facts is that Namāēw are 750 million years older than Tyrannosaurus rex dinosaurs. And so for me, that I think of dinosaurs, T-Rex as like a super, super old being. But to contextualize that with the age of Namāēw just blows my mind. Namāēw are a cool water fish who can live for more than 100 years and grow to over 6 feet long. And it takes about 15 to 30 years for Namāēw to reach maturity and start reproducing. So that's a long time period where they're pretty sensitive to lots of stressors. And when they mature, they make these long spring migrations to spawn in rivers. And these migrations are triggered by changes in water temperature and flow as winter runoff increases and waters warm. But Namāēw have declined by over 80% from their historical abundances. This map here shows the historical range of Namāēw in light blue and the current range in dark blue. So you can really see that compression. And these declines occurred following European colonization, where there was significant overharvest and habitat fragmentation, primarily through the building of dams. So these declines and stressors and the life history of Namāēw make them especially vulnerable to climate change. So this project arose from direct concerns from tribal leadership in the region who voiced their concerns about Namāēw given climate change. So in response, we started kind of a multifaceted project where one aim was to assess the projected climate impacts on Namāēw, and which we did in partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to inform their recent lake sturgeon species status assessment that was published this year. And then the other component of the project was to work directly with tribes to understand their perspectives and develop some adaptation options. So the goal here was to inform adaptation planning and build relationships for future collaborations. So jumping first into the climate impacts assessment, we downscaled climate projections to the Great Lakes region and found that although there's some variability in projections shown here at these kind of different model types, through time, which as we kind of go down, we're going from 2010 to 2039, all the way down to 2100 basically. So overall, most trends towards warmer and wetter conditions. We then broke down these projections into some finer scale to look at the primary climate drivers for Namāēw, which included that increasing precipitation, higher temperatures, and then really shifts in winter conditions, so less ice cover and less snow melt. We then thought about how these drivers may impact Namāēw life history stages and the habitats they rely on. So as I kind of mentioned earlier, Namāēw adults make these long spawning runs in the spring. They move into fast flowing streams and rivers and release their eggs. So during this period, they're most susceptible to that changes in increasing precipitation, temperatures, and decreasing snowmelt, as certain water temperature and flow conditions are necessary for successful spawning. Following spawning, eggs hatch and larvae and juveniles move into nearshore lakes and rivers to grow, where they can stay for many years. As I mentioned, it takes 15 to 30 years for a lake for Namāēw to mature. And so that's a long time for them to be growing and susceptible to all of the climate drivers, basically, that were identified here. Then once these juveniles grow, they move into deeper lakes and rivers where they're less susceptible to that kind of lower snowmelt runoff dynamic, but much more sensitive to the reduced ice cover. So altogether, we can start to understand the specific life stage and habitat sensitivities of Namāēw given climate change, which we then can use to inform the development of adaptation options, which is the second part. So for this part of the project, we sought to understand perspectives of representatives from tribal nations and organizations to understand their concerns, identify potential adaptation options and areas for collaboration. And so all of this work is summarized in this paper that, again, I'm super happy to share a copy if folks are interested. So to set the foundation for this project, we put together a core team of folks, myself, folks from Cliffwick, as well as College of Menominee Nation, to figure out how we wanted to conduct this project. And we identified 4 kind of central tenets for this work, where we sought to ground all of our understanding in the experience and relationships of individuals. We took a co-production approach where partners drove the questions, process, interpretation, summary, writing, all of it. We sought to develop a flexible process to meet individuals' capacities. Many of the folks we talked to are responsible for tons of different things. And so being really conscious of that was important to us. And of critical importance to any work in partnership with tribes is explicitly respecting and upholding the data and knowledge sovereignty rights of tribes, which we did primarily through some data sharing agreements and, of course, free, prior, and informed consent. So a couple of years ago, we held a series of conversations with representatives from tribal nations and organizations in the Great Lakes region, highlighted here. They spanned from 1854 Treaty Authority to Red Cliff Band, Keweenaw Bay, Menominee Indian Tribe, Bay Mills, Intertribal Council of Michigan, Little Traverse Bay Band of Odawa, Little River Band of Ottawa, and Gun Lake. And these folks were kind of selected for participation based off of interest and based off of their connection to Namāēw. So many of these tribes have a Sturgeon clan connection in their history, or are intertribal organizations responsible for working with tribes that have a Sturgeon clan or Sturgeon connection. So from these conversations, we first identified concerns folks had related to Namāēw and a changing climate. So here I'm showing all of these concerns specified here on the left with the frequency, so the number, basically the percentage of conversations that concern came up in. And so these themes ranged across Namāēw's relationship to humans, shown here with like the little people icon, Namāēw's relationship to the environment, and Namāēw's relationship to other beings. So I'm going to go through a bunch of plots like this, and they're all kind of following the same structure. So across all conversations, access and persistence were mentioned as key concerns. So access is kind of a multifaceted thing. Folks talked about a concern related to accessing access to exercise treaty rights, access to understand change, and then really just a core concern about whether Namāēw will persist into the future. So some specific concerns related to the relationship of Namāēw with humans focused on, again, that access component, user conflict, cultural and knowledge transfer, improved coordination, interagency coordination, and then limited capacity. So I think statement from one of the participants really highlights some of these concerns and challenges that folks are already experiencing, where they said, we are running from fire to fire. Currently, they are small fires, and we're trying to figure out why fires are starting, but we understand that fires are going to start more often. Then for concerns related to Namāēw's relationship to the environment, water quality and quantity were primary concerns, as well as shifts in season, especially the loss of winter and how that was going to affect Namāēw across their life history. So one study participant exemplified this by saying, we are experiencing a roller coaster of temperatures and snow melt. And so folks are already experiencing many of these things that they're concerned about now, but also into the future. And then concerns related to Namāēw's relationship with other beings, where persistence, the availability of fish to harvest, especially for cultural needs, like an annual sturgeon feast that happens every spring, and sturgeon harvest is part of that event and ritual. The impact of non-native species, and then overall the potential of adaptive capacity were primary concerns. This adaptive capacity component, I think, is really exemplified in this quote here from a participant that says, will we see a shift in the behavior of such a long-lived fish, or will the change outpace the ability of Namāēw to adapt? So many folks talked about how Namāēw are this, as we talked about, incredibly long-lived fish, have been through so much change and so many stressors over time. And so is climate change going to be just kind of another stressor that they're able to endure, or will it be a straw that broke the camel's back kind of thing? Okay, so the other aspect of these conversations we sought to understand were related to potential adaptation options, either those already in action, designated here with the little star, or those of interest for the future. So in total, we identified 20 themes spanning those same three categories: Namāēw's relationship with humans, Namāēw's relationship with the environment, and Namāēw's relationship with other beings. So related to Namāēw and their relationship with humans, folks are already doing lots of things. These kind of folks focused on limiting harvest, improved or kind of increased partnership and co-stewardship, interagency coordination, cultural advocacy, and sturgeon protections. And the element of co-stewardship came up a lot with folks, where they, again, exemplified here by this quote that says, it is critical to recognize tribes as co-stewards. And so something, yeah, that folks really were interested in uplifting. All right, and then related to Namāēw's relationship with the environment, some of these actions were ongoing, but many were not, and they indicated areas for kind of future work and interest, where some habitat restoration and water monitoring were ongoing, but improving connectivity, reducing pollution and kind of non-climate stressors, and managing water flows to more closely mimic natural conditions were especially of interest for future work. And finally, adaptation options related to Namāēw's relationship with other beings were ongoing, and really focused on adult and larval population monitoring. So lots of spring adult surveys, spawning surveys, movement tracking, to try to figure out where adults are spawning and which kind of core habitats need protection. And then some various kinds of stocking. And so a few of the folks we talked to had developed some streamside rearing stocking facilities to try to maintain the localized populations and build out from what already exists or exists previously. So here, I'm going to show another video highlighting an example of one of these stocking actions, this adult capture transfer that is ongoing with the Menominee tribe of Wisconsin.
Dams, of course, limit or restrict the migration. So the effects of Shawano Dam had on the Menominee people in the Sturgeon was it restricted them from coming to their original place of spawning to Kashina Falls. So it did not allow them to get back to Kashina Falls, so that the fish were no longer able to move, migrate upstream. They were limited. They just can't get by the dams.
Dams were built in 1892 at Shawano, below the reservation. And one thing about that, they did not ask the Menominee people or tell us that these dams were going to be built. They just put them there. It was a very cultural and spiritual loss to us, a loss of food sustenance, a loss of cultural identity. We weren't able to conduct the ceremony every spring that our ancestors had done for centuries. It was a big cultural loss to us.
So we got together with DNR and said we want to know if Lake Sturgeon can make it up to the reservation and return here to Kashina Falls. And the first step that the DNR took was we wanted to inform the public that that's what we were going to do. So we started a public participation effort that wasn't just on the reservation, but it was sort of Wolf River wide, Lake Winnebago wide. That's where our interests start.
Research standpoint, we have a checklist of stuff we need to accomplish, and I'd say it's exciting because of all the people. It started maybe with 100 people at the ceremonial spring back in '93, and now you're growing up to be it's over 1,000 people that come and celebrate the whole weekend. We have weekend activities. So when we first started this, we're renewing our cultural existence through our historical preservation department. So I'm looking at it that way, as if you look at it, one thing is it's great from a biological standpoint. I think it goes a lot to show with the Wisconsin DNR and Menominee Tribe and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Bureau of Indian Affairs all working cooperatively together. We have annual meetings and we discuss different management plans or how to manage lake sturgeon. I think with that itself, that's going to be a very successful cooperative research, our cooperative management partners.
So in that video, we kind of heard mention of a bunch of the adaptation options that we've discussed here. In there, we heard conversation around physically moving fish from below the dam to above the dam to improve natural recruitment and spawning, cultural advocacy and talking to the public about the importance of that relationship, improved coordination amongst different agencies, and then that community protection element of the sturgeon guards for those really sensitive times of the year. So I think that video just kind of exemplifies a bunch of the stuff that came out through these conversations. And so then finally, we were able to distinguish which concerns and adaptation options differ across each Great Lake region, where many concerns and adaptations were applicable across geographies. Shown here is in this kind of like bigger all bucket. So yeah, we've talked about them: improving connectivity, reducing erosion, improving the connection to nature, access, and that adaptive capacity element are kind of universal concerns, universal adaptation needs, focus on the targeted flow management, improving connectivity, limiting harvest and partnership, and then monitoring and movement tracking and stocking. But some of these concerns and adaptation options were region specific. For example, Lake Superior up here, concern focused a lot on loss of winter and the phenological changes. and shifting species dynamics, while Lake Huron folks were concerned around contaminants, limited coordination, disease, and Lake Michigan folks then, in kind of a similar way, were really focused on loss of winter, non-climate stressors, that coordination piece, and habitat protection and restoration. So I didn't cover all of this here, but this is, again, is in the paper, and so that is available for much more detail. So from this work, we identified several key information needs, which I've kind of touched on a little bit here, but those spanned a range and think about center on identifying the potential adaptive capacity. So answering that question of whether Namāēw are likely to be able to respond to these climate shifts or not, or what kind of is that potential adaptive capacity look like? How will increased spring runoff affect populations? That came out a lot through conversations where folks are talking about more rain on snow events, as well as just overall more extreme events in the springtime. And those runoff events can then limit spawning success. They can limit access for adult fish to reach spawning grounds, or they can wash out eggs and kind of cover eggs in sediment and stuff. So that is really a key question that we're interested in figuring out. That shifting phenology question, how will shifting seasons and conditions affect spawning and population condition? And then overall, how can we evaluate the efficacy and potential feasibility of these different adaptation options across the region? So one thing, we identified kind of where some things are really working well, and can we apply that more broadly or in different areas? So for our next steps, we're working with folks to incorporate these adaptation options into their stewardship planning. A project that I'll be taking on is really thinking about quantifying some of these relationships between Lake Sturgeon or Namāēw populations and climate impacts, like those shifting temperature and water flow conditions, to then understand that potential adaptive capacity. And then ultimately, we hope the process of this project can act as a model to expand more partnership-driven research. This project, I said from the start, highly collaborative, partner-driven, which is a fantastic way to get to a place of having feasible and desirable adaptation options that consider and incorporate multiple ways of knowing. So with that, thank you so much for your time and attention. My email is here, so please reach out with any thoughts. And the paper describing this work can be accessed through the QR code, or I am very happy to send a link or a copy of the paper. Thank you so much.